Imagine a man who has spent his entire life defying expectations, a legend who built his name on grit, honesty, and the courage to say what no one else would dare. Now picture that same man turning his sharp eye toward one of the most misunderstood subjects of our time, Islam. What he reveals isn't what Hollywood scripts, the media headlines, or public debates would have you believe. Instead, it's something deeper, something that stops people in their tracks and leaves them speechless. This isn't just another celebrity opinion, it's Clint Eastwood, a voice of raw truth, offering reflections that challenge assumptions and open doors to understanding. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll see why his words are echoing far beyond the screen, and why fans who thought they'd heard it all are now rethinking everything. Clint Eastwood has long been known as one of Hollywood's most unapologetic figures, someone who refuses to bend to trends or polish his words to fit the expectations of the crowd. Over the decades, his image has been built not only through the roles he has played, the rugged cowboy, the unshakable cop, the hardened leader, but also through the way he carries himself off-screen. When people hear his name, they think of a man who doesn't sugarcoat, who doesn't hesitate to say what others are thinking but are too cautious to voice. This reputation for blunt honesty is why any comment he makes on sensitive subjects immediately catches attention. In a world where most celebrities carefully manage their image and avoid controversial themes, Eastwood stands apart because he sees no point in hiding behind political correctness. That sense of raw authenticity makes his words heavier than most, because audiences know he isn't tailoring them to please a certain group. His legacy of fearlessness has trained fans to expect boldness from him, and when he touches on topics that most actors would never address, it reinforces his role as an icon of unfiltered truth. People may not always agree with his perspectives, but they respect the courage it takes to express them without hesitation. This is why when he shares his personal thoughts on Islam, people lean in closer. It isn't just another celebrity endorsement or a calculated PR move. It's Clint Eastwood speaking from the same place of unflinching honesty that has defined him for decades. Whether shocking, inspiring, or challenging, his words carry the weight of a man who has built his reputation on saying exactly what he thinks, no matter how uncomfortable it may make others. When Clint Eastwood turned his attention to Islam, what struck many was not a recycled stereotype or the kind of dismissive commentary that often comes from Hollywood circles, but rather a surprising depth of perspective. Instead of focusing on fear or division, he pointed out values that often go unnoticed in mainstream discussions. He highlighted discipline as one of the central pillars he saw in the faith, a structured way of life that demands consistency and accountability, something he has long admired in his own career and personal journey. Eastwood has always respected hard work, order, and self-control, and to him, Islam's framework of daily prayers, fasting, and moral guidelines reflected those same qualities. Beyond discipline, he also spoke about honor, an element that resonates strongly with his own cinematic legacy. Many of his characters live by codes, whether as gunslingers or soldiers, and he found parallels in how Islam emphasizes dignity, loyalty, and the responsibility of one's word. He didn't frame it as something alien, but as a value system with universal relevance. The third aspect he pointed out was faith itself, not just in a religious sense, but as a deeper trust in something larger than oneself. For a man who has built his life on independence and resilience, acknowledging the strength that comes from faith showed another layer to his perspective. By focusing on these qualities, Eastwood managed to shift the lens away from conflict and controversy towards something that fans didn't expect from him: respect and recognition of the virtues within a tradition often misunderstood in the West. His surprising perspective didn't come across as a lecture, but as an observation rooted in the same straightforward clarity that defines him, which is why it left many listeners intrigued rather than defensive. Clint Eastwood's reflections on Islam gain even more weight when placed against the backdrop of how Hollywood has often chosen to portray the religion. For decades, mainstream films and television have leaned on simplified and often negative portrayals, reducing an entire faith and its followers into one-dimensional characters that fit the mold of fear, conflict, or villainy. Eastwood, who has spent much of his career inside that very system, offers a striking contrast by acknowledging that these portrayals are incomplete and misleading. His perspective isn't that of someone outside the industry critiquing from a distance, but of a veteran who has seen how narratives are shaped, sold, and consumed. By speaking on Islam in terms of discipline, honor, and faith, he undermines the common Hollywood narrative that tends to strip away humanity in favor of stereotypes. For many fans, this was almost jarring because it came from a figure who himself made a career out of films built on strong archetypes and moral codes, yet here he was challenging the narrow storytelling lens applied to an entire faith. His remarks created space for people to reflect on how easily media can influence perception and how rarely voices within Hollywood step outside the safe line to question those portrayals. Eastwood's stance doesn't erase the entertainment industry's history of shaping biased images, but it does serve as a counterpoint that encourages people to reconsider what they think they know. The fact that he chose to highlight values and strengths rather than lean on recycled images makes his words stand out even more. Fans didn't expect a figure of his stature to challenge the default Hollywood lens, but when he did, it sparked a deeper realization about how narratives work and how different reality can be from the screen. Clint Eastwood's reflections on Islam carry a different kind of weight because they come from someone who has lived a long life, full of experiences that stretch far beyond the Hollywood spotlight. At his age, every word he speaks feels less like a passing comment and more like distilled wisdom, shaped by decades of observing the world, human nature, and the power of belief systems. He has seen societies rise and fall, wars justified under different banners, and cultural shifts that redefine what people think they know. This lifelong exposure gives him a unique lens to look at Islam not as a distant curiosity, but as part of a much larger human story. Fans recognize that when a man who has been on both sides of fame and history offers thoughts on something as profound as faith, he is not just filling the air with noise, but drawing from a deep well of perspective. Eastwood has built a career portraying men of principle, men who live by codes, and it is easy to see why he would resonate with aspects of Islam that stress accountability, honor, and spiritual grounding. His own journey from being a young actor carving out a name for himself to becoming a cultural icon who has seen several generations pass before him makes him more reflective, more deliberate in how he views matters of truth and meaning. That maturity strips away the tendency for superficial takes and instead highlights connections that younger voices might overlook. So when he speaks on Islam, his words are framed by a lifetime's worth of lessons on discipline, human conflict, and the pursuit of integrity. This makes fans stop and listen, not because he is a celebrity, but because he is a seasoned observer sharing insights that come from lived experience rather than fleeting opinion. The reaction of fans to Clint Eastwood's reflections on Islam was one of genuine surprise, and for many, it left them speechless. People have grown used to celebrities either avoiding religion entirely or speaking in carefully measured tones to avoid controversy. But Eastwood's words came with a raw honesty that cut through the usual Hollywood filter. Fans who have admired him for years as the tough, stoic figure on screen didn't expect to hear him acknowledge Islam in a way that emphasized respect and recognition rather than fear or dismissal. The shock came not from hostility, but from the realization that someone of his stature, someone who has long embodied Western grit and independence, would openly point out the discipline, honor, and strength within a faith that has often been misrepresented in the very industry he helped shape. This wasn't the kind of statement that could be brushed aside as another scripted soundbite, because Eastwood has never been known for pandering or playing to popular sentiment. His reputation for blunt truth-telling made his perspective all the more powerful, and fans felt it. Some were caught off guard, unsure how to process such an unexpected moment of respect, while others found themselves quietly impressed that he chose to highlight virtues instead of echoing the tired narratives that dominate public discussion. What left people speechless was not just what he said, but how naturally it seemed to come from him without pretense or hesitation. For many, it served as a reminder that wisdom can challenge assumptions, and hearing it from a figure they've long admired carried a deeper impact. In that silence, fans were left to reconsider not only his words, but their own perceptions of a subject they may never have looked at in this light before. Clint Eastwood's reflections on Islam were never just about the religion itself, but about something larger, an invitation to look past labels and see the shared values that connect people across different faiths and cultures. At a time when public discussions often highlight differences and divisions, his perspective felt like a reminder that beneath the surface, the human search for meaning, discipline, and integrity is universal. By recognizing the discipline in daily practices, the honor in living by principles, and the strength in faith, Eastwood was indirectly pointing out that these qualities are not exclusive to Islam but resonate with anyone who has lived by a moral code or sought purpose beyond themselves. His words carried the suggestion that if we strip away the fear and misunderstanding attached to certain labels, we begin to see reflections of our own values in others. For fans, this was profound because it came from a man who has long embodied toughness and independence. Yet here he was speaking of respect, connection, and shared humanity. It challenged people to think about how often they fall into the trap of defining entire groups by narrow narratives, rather than recognizing the deeper values that transcend boundaries. Eastwood's larger message wasn't delivered as a lecture, but as a simple truth drawn from experience that strength, dignity, and belief in something greater than oneself are qualities worth respecting no matter where they are found. This perspective opened a door for listeners to reflect on their own biases and assumptions, encouraging them to see Islam not as a distant or misunderstood entity, but as part of the broader human story. His willingness to highlight common ground rather than division gave fans a rare moment of clarity, showing how respect can emerge from a place of understanding rather than fear. In the end, Clint Eastwood's words remind us that truth has the power to cut through noise, and wisdom comes when we're willing to see beyond stereotypes. His reflections on Islam weren't about politics or publicity. They were about values, discipline, honor, and faith, the very things that give life meaning, no matter who you are or where you come from. For fans, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that even in a world filled with labels and divisions, there are voices that point us back toward our shared humanity. Eastwood showed that sometimes the boldest thing a person can do is speak with respect, and in doing so, he left many speechless, not because they had nothing to say, but because they realized they had much more to think about. Thank you for listening, and may these words spark reflection in your own journey. Good luck as you carry forward with curiosity, courage, and respect for truth wherever you find it.